on Sunday will mark the 8th anniversary of the Marikana Massacre, which claimed the lives of 44 people, 34 of those people shot dead on the 16th of August in 2012. And that is the topic of our discussion, our next discussion now. The Marikana Commission of Inquiry, chaired by retired Judge Ian Farlam, recommended that the police service implement training to improve its public order policing. Now, a panel of experts was also appointed to provide oversight, but what is the scorecard of the police so far? Now, according to one of those panelists, progress has been steady, but there are still some gaps. He believes most police officers at station level lack the skills and the equipment needed to respond to community unrest effectively. Also, there are far too few public order policing units in light of the rising number of protests in our country. Let's unpack the story now with two guests. They join us via our video link. Themba Masuku is from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, and international law enforcement expert Cees De Rover served both on the panel of experts, but he was also, if I can just get a reminder here, he was also the expert witness for the SAPS during the Marikana Commission of Inquiry. To both of our guests, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM report. Cees, I want to get going with you and talk about, you wrote quite an interesting article that was now 2 years ago on the findings of that panel of experts on policing and on crowd management. The lessons that we learned, those hard, difficult, painful lessons we learned from Marikana, to your knowledge, have they been put into practice today?
The short answer to it is I think they have not. I think there is a concerted effort maybe to make it look as if these recommendations have been implemented, but when we talk about a systemic approach where from the top down all these recommendations have been taken on board, then I don't think that is the case. And the simplest way to prove that is that the report with its annexure documents has been with the minister for 2 years. And to my knowledge, that report hasn't been made public, and no further steps have been taken, because the report sets out what should be done. But the next question that then requires an answer is, how are you going to do that? And that process is still to get underway.
Okay, in our introduction, we identified you as both being a part of that panel of experts, but also being the expert witness for the SAPS during the Marikana Commission of Inquiry. And still, as we mark now 8 years since the 16th of August 2012, still so many questions around the handling of those moments leading up to gunfire being opened up on those protesting miners, when in fact there was no threat to life, there was no threat to property at the time.
Well, I think when you zoom in enough on any situation, you will find particular details that I think are bothersome and a great concern. And I think the Farlam Commission went to great lengths to get those details. As far as I'm concerned, and I say this coming with a lot of international experience, you need to zoom out a little bit, because what happened at Marikana was already happening for 5 days before it finally escalated. And there are a lot of other players in South Africa, starting with the government, but for example also including a South African Human Rights Commission, who have an active mandate under your constitution, who sat by and watched. Like nobody did anything, like none of the actors that I would expect in a well-functioning democracy to swing into action and into gear undertook any effort to defuse a situation where I think the police were attempting to negotiate in a situation and a reality where they had nothing to offer. This was not their bargaining chip. Other parties may have been able to meet or discuss or alleviate the grievances of the striking miners, but likely the police would have been the last ones to be able to solve that.
Yeah, the police were not mandated to intervene in the miners' reason for striking, which was for better pay. Themba Masuku, I want to bring you into the discussion here. And again, as we mark this very dark anniversary in our country's democracy, the big question is still around the reconstruction of Scene 2 at Marikana. That's where those 17 mine workers were gunned down, trying to run away, some of them hiding behind the rocks there.
Morning. I think that is an area of really great concern. That 8 years on, the investigations into Marikana have not been concluded because the IPID has indicated that they have not completed their investigation because they could not reconstruct this, particularly Scene 2, which is very, very important in that allegations are that there were assassinations that took place when miners were hiding behind the rocks or they were fleeing. So that needs to be concluded, and it's a travesty in many ways that government has not been able to provide the necessary funding for that particular aspect to be properly concluded, so that the Marikana issue can be concluded properly, and those that are found to have committed atrocities are brought to account. I think that's an area of really, really great concern that IPID has not been able to conclude. As a result of that, we have not seen a greater movement regarding prosecutions. The only prosecutions that we are aware of are prosecutions that happens before the 16th. On the 13th, there are prosecutions that are taking place involving 2 police officers. But beyond that, we don't know, because the IPID has not concluded its investigation, because they've not been able to get the necessary funding to reconstruct the scene and assist in the conclusion of their own investigations.
I mean, Themba, is that good enough, that IPID responds to the reasons why they haven't gotten their act together to do the reconstruction of Scene 2? Is a lack of funds?
Well, the reality is that you need funding. You need funds to engage in that kind of a process. And the responsible authorities are supposed to make that funding available. I'm very aware that when the then executive director, Mr. McBride, was the executive director, made several attempts to ensure that they have those funds available to them so that they can conclude their own investigations. And that has not been done. But again, I think the issue has to be placed back in terms of IPID's own independence. IPID is within the Ministry of Police, the same minister who is also responsible for the police. So in many ways, it's a challenge that you have a minister who's responsible for police and also responsible for a body that is accountable to investigate police officers. Yeah. So we've recently been calling really for almost like a separation of IPID away from the Ministry of Police, so that IPID can be independent and conduct its own business, independent away from the minister, who is also an interest in the functioning of the police. So the issue of budget becomes very, very central, because it is the same minister who basically motivates for budget for both the police and the IPID. So the minister can in many ways withdraw funding when they believe it is not necessary. And the Marikana issue is an issue that needs to be reflected on very, very carefully, because it's a travesty that 8 years on, the investigations have not been concluded.
I mean, it absolutely is. And Cees, I want to bring you in here and talk to you about what really does appear on the face of it to be a lack of political will, not only to make arrests and prosecutions for the deaths of those 34 miners, on the 16th of August 2012, but also to compensate, to finalize the compensation for the injured and for the families of those who were killed. What do you make of not only government's response 8 years on, but also the SAPS and how it has sought to recover from what happened at Marikana?
Well, the first time I came to South Africa was in February 2013. That was already almost half a year after the events at Marikana. And when I was speaking to the legal counsel for SAPS, the lead counsel, said something that stuck with me. He said it is important that justice is seen to be done. And there is a difference between justice being done and justice being seen to be done. And it seems to me that this whole process, you know, where a Commission of Inquiry is established, but it can only make recommendations. A panel of experts is established, but it can only make recommendations. We can't hold, as individuals or as collective, whether it be a Commission of Inquiry or a panel of experts, we can't hold the recipients or the ones that set up these structures to actually implementing what we then find and recommend. And I think that borders on criminally negligent.
I mean, Themba, that's devastating to hear, isn't it? That legal counsel for the SAPS, at the time of the start of the inquiry, said that justice must be seen to be done. Well,
I mean, if you remember, just immediately after the massacre, that the National Commissioner at that time said the response of the police represented the best responsible policing. And that is also stuck with a lot of us, that the police, even at that time, did not acknowledge the magnitude of what had happened. And they, even during the Falam Commission, they came in and they did not take full responsibility of what had happened. So it's also at an attitudinal level that the institution has not taken responsibility of what had happened in Marikana, or what has happened in Marikana. So what is happening even now, 8 years on, could be linked to their attitude when this incident happened, that they do not want to take full responsibility and address the issues that emanated in Marikana. I mean, we are sitting 2 years on since we provided the minister with the report. The findings of the report have not been made public, like Cees has already mentioned. There's processes underway to ask the minister to release the report so that the public can engage with those findings. A lot was recommended by the panel of experts, and we're seeing very little progress in terms of implementation. Yes, there are good signs that we're seeing, like for example, we no longer see R5s or weapons capable of automatic fire being used in crowd management systems, which is a good thing. We see a kind of awareness. Police are much more aware. They're cautious. Tactical units are no longer deployed in protest, which is a good thing. Yeah. Because we see this after Marikana. But there's a lot more around the professionalization and demilitarizing the police that we yet to see. And the COVID-19 period has actually exposed a lot of problems within our policing system.
Well, those 34 miners that were shot dead on the 16th of August 2012, paying the ultimate price to see some of those improvements in the police. To both of our guests, we're out of time, unfortunately. Thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM Report. Cees De Rover is a former witness. He was witness, expert witness, in fact, for the SAPS during the Marikana Commission of Inquiry. And Themba Masuku is from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. Thank you very much for helping us to unpack that story.